the city of Waterville. We are starting with school budget tonight. Is that right, Steve?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Haley,
Superintendent Haley? Yes, please.
would you like to come to the table, or he
oh,
could
yeah,
either
probably
come
the
to the
table.
table or the,
Is that, okay,
either way.
table
You
or
could come
podium,
here
either
or
way.
the podium.
That's a little far away, but that's going to be a hundred view.
If you need a table, you'll want to sit over there. No, no, you need to go to a microphone because of the
Chad
broadcast.
doesn't like you to project loud enough.
We can do that.
Time's up.
Been fun.
Thanks for coming. Next.
Thank you.
Sir. I thought you were going to give it to me. That's actually how we're going to be.
No, one.
Thank you.
One for two, one for Jay.
Sure.
We have one. Accept.
Sure.
All right. Just stepped in as a school board member as well. Good evening.
Am I on? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. Talk about the 2022-23 school budget. I want you to know that we really appreciated the meeting of the City Finance Committee and the School Finance Committee. I can tell you in my 21 years of presenting budgets to City Council, I've never had such a team atmosphere in that meeting, where it was all about Waterville and how we can make the city and the people within it prosper. And I was very impressed walking home, and I've been impressed ever since about the attitude of everybody that was involved in that meeting. So in that meeting, I did present this sheet, which is the summary expenditure sheet and the summary revenue sheet for the projected 22-23 school year. Now, the summary expenditure sheet is the front page of the two-page handout stapled together. And that lists by department, or what we call cost centers, their total ask. So if you wanted to see, and unfortunately I use them every time because they're the first one in that paper, Special Services Department, their ask is for $5,875,794.62. That's $420,326.19, and that's a 7.7% increase over last year. So you can go down through every single cost center that make up the entire budget and see what the added increases are. I'll take questions on it anytime you want, but I'm going to move on unless I see somebody asking. The second page on that same handout is what we call the summary revenue. And that is where we try to explain how we're going to pay for the expenditures on that first page. So the largest amount of money we get, of course, is from the state. And so you're going to see those top rows showing us what we're to receive from the state. We got a very good increase from the state this year. That obviously helped us, but not quite enough because we're still coming back to ask for more local taxes as well. But this whole sheet, with all the fine print on it, that you have to get pretty close to if you got eyes like mine, is designed to do one thing, and that is come up with the number in that box on the lower right-hand corner. And that number is the number that, if this budget passed today, that's what we'd have to ask for from the city of Waterville for new taxes. $733, $792.60. Now, interestingly, during that conversation of the two finance committees, I don't remember who exactly, it might have been Jay, but I won't attribute it to anybody, asked me, where does this leave our teachers in comparison to other communities around us? And I said, it leaves them below. But at the time, I didn't have the data to actually show that. So the other sheet that's handed out, where you see some yellow on it, is a list of the 7 communities around us, including us, and what each of those school systems are paying their teachers at different levels. A typical teacher's contract has 3 columns and anywhere from 25 to 30 rows. The 3 columns represent different levels of matriculation. The first column is a bachelor's, which you need a minimum of a bachelor's and some other things in order to be certified as a teacher. The second column is the master's. And the third column is a second master's, PhD, a CAS, Certificate of Advanced Study, or a national certification as a teacher. Will prompt you up 1 column. You can obviously see we pay more for a starting teacher. We pay more for somebody at the CAS level than we do at the bachelor's level. So every time you see a row that says 1 year experience, you're going to see a number for what we're paying at bachelor's. In this particular case, it's $37,275, and you notice that's yellowed. Then you go to master's. Waterville pays $39,275. And then you go to master's plus 30, which is the same as a CAS. It's $41,275. All 3 are yellowed. As a matter of fact, if you look more than halfway down that page, you can see that Waterville's column carries the yellows. Yellow means the lowest pay for any of the 7 communities. So it switches over at the 5th year of experience and follows that district along until it gets to about the 16th year. And then you can see it goes yellow in Waterville's column until it gets to the point where it's no use comparing anymore because a lot of the 7 districts don't go that far. So here's what that story tells me. We pay our beginning teachers less than anybody else in the area. We do okay in the middle of the pack, and we're woefully inadequate at the end. But when I asked that question, or when I was asked that question in the 2 finance committee meetings, and I said, they're woefully underpaid compared to the other 7, but I said, I'll get the data to prove that for you. I know this was Jay that looked at me and said, what's your goal? And I said, our board has said they want our teachers at least in the middle of the pack. They don't necessarily need to be the highest, but we don't want them to be the lowest. And we are at the lowest right now. So then he followed up with, does this increase that you put in the budget for teachers, which is 5%, does that get them to the middle of the pack? And I said, no, it will not. He said, what would it take to get them to the top? I said, I don't know. I can certainly go and run some what we call simulations by changing some things. Obviously, we negotiate our contracts with the WEA, the Waterville Educators Association. I can tell you that if we leave this budget the way it is now with a 5%, the vast majority of our teachers next year will not be making what the teachers in the other 7 communities made this year.
Can I just interject one thing real quick? So the spreadsheet you're looking at, just so we're all on the same page, those numbers there are for 21-22. That's the current school year we're in for all these other districts. So when we put the 5% on for 22-23, we are in a lot of places still falling below the 21-22s of the other districts that haven't negotiated yet, so those will even go higher.
The last thing that I'll point out on that sheet is that where you see the reds are the highest for that particular tier. You might be surprised who carries most of the high salaries.
Eric, can you pull that microphone just towards you? Can you pull your microphone just towards you?
Sure.
Thank you.
So today, I received a resignation, which is not atypical for this time of year. People are making choices about next year. So I inquired about why this person was leaving Waterville Public Schools, and the answer was that she got a $10,000 increase by going to a different school system that was probably physically closer to her residence than Waterville was. Mm-hmm. The other effect is when I know that we're not being competitive is we put together search committees for all of our open positions. There's a chair to that search committee. There's a process that we use. It's a tight process. They recommend a finalist. As a superintendent, I do the final interview, but it's never, as I tell the candidates, a yes or no interview. I'm not going to substitute my poor judgment for hours and hours of labor that the search committees put in. They tell me this is the best candidate, it's the best candidate. The only reason I meet with them, I have 2. One, I think they ought to know the face of the person that's running the school system and get to know a little bit about my philosophy of education. I think that's important. But secondly, probably more important to them, is what is the salary and what are the benefits and what do I get for professional development, educational benefit, otherwise. We go over all of that. And then I take them into payroll and make sure the paperwork's done, and then I bring them to the board, hopefully for nomination. They can't sign a contract, obviously, until the nomination by me to the board is accepted. When I start getting finalists, that we get to the point where I start talking about their salary, and they give me that look, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that the salary, that's an $8,000 cut for me to come here. And I don't land them. That's just a sinking feeling in your stomach when this is the best candidate. So I went to the board. This was a contract ago, and said, if you want me to land the finalists that these search committees are handing us, then you need to increase our teachers' pay by a substantial amount. I said at that time, I think we've been negotiating too hard, and that those around us are reaping the benefit of that. I said that will be tough. At that particular time, that was 4 years ago. We were not where we are today physically in the city. But I said it's a must-do fight that we've got to take on to get these salaries up. So we entered into a 3-year, pretty good 4.5% average increase. Back then was a really good raise. It brought us up to about the middle of the pack. In the last 2 years, we've fallen precipitously. So, I ran some numbers before I dropped my notebook all over the place. On what's causing, besides salary, what's causing this increase in our budget? So teacher cost, this is now using the 5%. Teacher cost for that contract, if we settled at the 5%, which as I said is going to be inadequate, that's $449,339. The ed tech contract, and again, we had the same situation with ed techs. McDonald's had a marquee out there that said $15 an hour. We had ed techs making 12. We knew we had to do something with that because we were losing our good ed techs. The ed tech contract cost us $356,226. The total of those two numbers, to save you adding up, is $805,565. Our medical insurance increase. $288,556. Even though we did well by oil in comparative standards, oil costs have gone up this year $127,000. We were at 198 the year before.
195, and now I believe we're at
297.
297.
297. We locked in at 297, which is a good deal right now, looking at the market. And then we had some other things that have happened that were a joint problem between the city and the school. One of them, snow plowing, because we've expanded in the city's side, we've expanded what needs to get plowed, and we haven't increased that crew. So the availability of them doing school parking lots is not there anymore. So we've got an estimate of 100,000. I think that's based on 14 storms, if I remember correctly.
Can you expand on what you mean by that? Can you expand on that statement where the city has expanded on its plowing, but you're falling behind on getting plowed?
My understanding is that because of the renovations taking place downtown, that sidewalks are now going to belong to the city, and that the developments going on across the street over, and Steve knows probably better than I what those areas are going to take up too much time for them, maintenance, public works, to get to our schoolyards in time to open. We need to be opened up pretty early.
Okay.
So, if I can just jump in here, my understanding was that it was an issue that had to do with the plans for the Hall School and making it more difficult to plow. But I think we need to revisit this a little bit because at our last budget workshop, we had Matt Skane here, and I think we decided that it was worth revisiting this arrangement, that it might actually be cheaper for our public works to do that plowing than to have to add 100,000 to your budget. So I think that's something that's still in play and we should look at, especially to determine what is the reason that you suddenly have $100,000 in your budget for plowing.
That would be good news and welcome news, because the city's always done an excellent job. They know where all the, I know it's kind of like when you drive your own car, you know where all the odd things are, what happens with it. It takes a while for anybody to get to know that. Having plowed my own road for a number of years, you get to understand where it's slippery and where it's not, where you can pile snow, where you can't. All those things make a difference in how you approach that issue. So I would love to think the city could reconsider that.
Yeah. I just think we need to have Matt in the conversation, obviously.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the last thing that I'll say, and I'll gladly take questions, is we were asked what it would take to get our teachers to the top. So we ran a sim to see what it would take to get our teachers to the top. And it would be 2.2 million that we'd be asking for from the city, not the 733. That's too much. We know that's too much. We've got an in-between simulation that would cost 1.3 million to the city. That would certainly take our teachers near, not there, obviously, but it would take them near.
Can you give us more details on that? What are we talking about versus the 773 that you've
I want to
requested now?
be careful about what I say tonight to the city council, because I haven't talked to the board yet in regards to these sims.
Okay.
And the finance committee on the board side really wants to hear information first, and I understand that. So I'm trying to be a little bit general with it. We've run 5 simulations. Now that takes a lot of work and time. So we weren't able to have it ready for the last board meeting. And so thus this meeting comes before the board meeting when we do have it ready. We've got another one. What's the one that's the 914?
That's 1.1 million.
1.1. We have another one that's 1.1 million. The ask would be total, which is not quite double what we're asking for now. That would certainly help get us there as well.
Have you, Mary Ann, if you want to ask, well, and at least go to the microphone, because no one can hear you online, and I can't hear you either. Okay.
None of us are accustomed to mics, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Eric, it's a very simple question that in these different simulations is to try to get them not at the lower part of where it's comparatively to other school districts, but to moving them up so the teachers feel that it's been significant. That's what the aim is without telling me which scenario at this point.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
As you know, money isn't everything when it comes to job satisfaction. As a matter of fact, I read a research article several years ago, which I was quite surprised with. I knew money wasn't going to be number one as far as job satisfaction, but number one was that my boss knows what it is I do for him or her, and they tell me frequently how much they appreciate the work I do. And I think one of the things that trying to get teachers up to par with other teachers in this area, where job market indexes, inflation run pretty similar. We're not trying to compare ourselves to Portland. We're not trying to compare ourselves to Camden or some of the other richer communities. We're just trying to compare ourselves to where a person could reasonably, from this area, travel to and teach. So a lot of what comes with an effort to do that on a real basis is appreciation, that they're being recognized. I know that happened with the ed techs. You know, they felt like they weren't appreciated because they weren't getting paid what everybody else was. I heard more compliments about how they felt better about doing their job than I did about, I really like the extra money. So I think it's more about appreciation, that you are sincerely. They know there's limits. I know there's limits. That's when I said 2.2 million. Even we know that's too much to ask in 1 year.
Right. So we're all seeing the need for wages to increase across the board, and we have rising costs. That's just a fact of where we are right now. I think it's unlikely, as you say, that we can catch up in 1 year. So I'm wondering if any of the scenarios you run have looked at, say a 5-year period where it's hard to say because other communities are making changes as well. But I'd really like to see a plan where there's a 5-year goal, because that would also help the city plan. Yeah. Have you thought about doing something like that?
By law, the maximum length of contract we can negotiate with teachers is 3 years.
Okay, and that's the length of time you're negotiating this
That's what we're
contract?
looking at in this contract.
Okay.
What I'm giving you is just this next year's. We haven't progressed into the second year or the third year, because generally you kind of try to settle that first year and make sure that everybody's in agreement on that before you move into second and third. And we're only in this will be, I think, the third negotiation session coming up. So we're not very deep into it. But the good thing is, from what I understand, there are not a lot of language issues. And as you know, anybody that's negotiated, language issues take a lot of time. Not that money doesn't. But then the money comes at the end, where, okay, we've agreed on language. At least that's a typical process, is that you get your language straightened out, you agree on that, and then you go to money. So we started money on day one. And that's really the biggest issue. I think there are a couple of minor other things, but. So yes, we'll be looking at presenting something to you that would have a 3-year cost factor associated with it.
Okay. We haven't really talked too much about the expenses side. Well, we have, obviously. We've talked about what you're requesting, but we haven't really looked at any details on increases. I just want to see if there are any other questions at this point on details of the budget and requests beyond the teachers' salaries. Or anything else, really. Counselors, do you have any questions?
Are you asking Eric to
No.
broaden his horizon before we ask questions, or?
Well, the issue of an increase in the amount that's stated on the sheet that you presented us with is kind of a big deal. But before we address that, I thought if we might look at the detail in the budget and see if there are any questions on increases, say, in the different cost centers or other details of the budget. Are there any other questions?
I have questions, but I think it's fitting after the fact. If he's going to explain the increase that he presented for this year, I want to hear that before I go further with my questions.
Okay, sure. So do you have more to share on increases in the
don't.
budget? You
No.
don't, right. So I think you can take it away.
Hey, guess what? All questions are fair. Eric, yeah. 3 years, I've asked the same question the last 3 years. Did the boiler in the high school get changed?
Is the boiler in the high school?
I think it was the high school that we were talking about 3 years ago, and then last year, and then 2 years ago, and then last year, we were talking about there was a boiler that needed to be changed, and you were working on it or weren't working on it. What's the status on that?
I don't think it was high school, though. High school.
Yeah, I don't remember which one of the schools it was.
Junior high, maybe.
It was junior high.
Okay.
And we replaced, there was one that was dead.
Yep.
And the other was pretty bad. You might remember, I think it was 3 years ago, we had to call off school to junior high because that boiler failed. We got it fixed. We got through that year, the next year. Last year, we had, it was last year, we had enough in the reserve to take care of those boilers, and they're both completely done.
Great, awesome.
Both schools.
Yep, and that's where I was going with that, so, awesome. Year over year, 2021 and 21-22, student head count, or enrollment, should I say. Do you have those numbers in front of you, total from K through 12? 2021 enrollment, and then 21-22 enrollment.
I do. place than I'm going. Nope, we better go with yours.
This is the 279
Yeah.
for 22, 23.
Yep. And that is for 21, 22. So,
This is 22, 23.
but those are numbers.
From 21, 22. This is, looking at the 279.
Yeah.
For the 22, 23 year, and it's basing it on the enrollment for 21, 22.
Correct.
Sure.
Not counting Educare, it's 1,618 students,
For 21, 22,
or 21, 22.
and do you have the one for 2021?
Let me just, something told me that I put, no, I don't. I thought I had that 279 in here.
Do you know if that's up or down from 2021, the 21, 22 number?
Our school population has consistently been going down over the last 7 or 8 years.
10-4, okay. If you haven't got it right now, you can email it to us later. That's okay. Yep. Nice and easy. That's all I got. I won't make them sweat.
Okay.
I actually have a spreadsheet that goes back 25 years.
That would be fantastic. I like spreadsheets.
Well, I inherited it when I became superintendent. I decided I better continue it. It's,
I like it.
Counselor Frankie, you have a question.
Just briefly, is there a COVID component to this year's school budget?
what's the question?
Is there a COVID component to this year's school budget?
A COLA component?
COVID.
I'm not sure what that means, but what he's asking.
If you're asking, Claude, if we're asking if we're using any COVID money to support this budget, no. We're using COVID money for other allowable expenses.
No, what I was driving at, are there any increase in the cost of running the schools that are attributable to COVID, whether short-term or long-term? I'm just interested in how the pandemic has impacted your budget. Is it negative or positive? I don't know.
Do you want me to repeat that? Did
Yes,
you?
please.
Okay. So the question is, are there any impacts of COVID that have caused the budget to change, either
we've been-
short-term or long-term?
I'd say the quick answer to that is no, because we've been fortunate enough to receive federal dollars outside the budget to handle those needs. As a matter of fact, again, because of salaries, at least in my opinion, we had created some positions that were going to be paid for by COVID so that we could help students with social emotional learning and other things, some math and ELA specialists to come in and help with the learning loss that's gone on, and we couldn't fill those positions. We've advertised since August, and we could not fill those positions.
Will that funding continue for this next school year?
The funding that we had, we've had multiple avenues of funding from the federal government. We've been really blessed for the help that that's given us. But like most schools, that money is going to be, it's targeted for one more year on most of the things that we had it listed for. And then the next year, that money, almost all of that money will go to help the offset cost of the new hall school.
And you have until September of 2024 to finish it up.
Okay.
And Rick, I wanted to say, can you hear me? Can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Well, I can hear you. I gotta make sure he can hear you.
Okay. One of the things that I just saw on the 279, so
Yeah.
might have not said it accurately. It says on here, when they calculate subsidy, they use the attending pupils for 2 different years. So attending pupils, October of 2020, it says 1,587 students. And attending pupils for October of 2021, when they took the snapshot of the count, was 1,650.
10-4. Thank you.
So those numbers went up
Those numbers are not really accurate numbers, because you remember when COVID struck, we went remote,
Right.
and so attendance
Yeah.
went astray. So you really can't look at those years and say we have an accurate accounting.
It'll come out, it'll start getting back to where it belongs, but.
Right.
It's what I got right now. It's kind of like our census.
Yes, it is. Yes, we have a lot of numbers that are in flux right now. Okay, so right now, the COVID funding that you're still receiving, is covering any impacts of
It's
the
covering
disease.
most of our summer schooling and also our enhancement programming, which are programs run in the summertime that kids find interesting, self-select, like rebuilding automobiles, cooking class. Let's see, what else have we got? Oh, lifeguard training.
I don't think that was picked up.
Yeah, is it for,
Stick in here.
can you hear me now? Is it for all the schools, the summer programs?
Try it again, he's trying to get your mic up.
Oh. Can you hear me?
There you go. I guess you
Okay.
can come closer to the mic or speak louder.
All right, so my question, is it for all the schools, the summer programs?
We have summer programming planned for the Mitchell School. We have summer programming for the Hall School. Don Rue at the junior high has plans, he just can't get any staff. And that's an issue we've got right now, is that staff just feel like they need to take the summer off. They need a break. So we've got staffing issues at the high school as well.
I got a question, like, do you have like the numbers, how many kids are actually, like, performance went down, and like, how many kids are actually staying back this year? Or need the summer program for next year?
Flavia, I didn't really quite understand what you were saying.
How many children need extra help or are staying back?
We don't typically keep students back. What we do is put them into enhancing programs the next year to try to get them extra time during the school year. The research is very clear about holding students back, that it's very seldom successful.
Because of the whole school, I mean, of some of the, I mean, we're in June, going into June. So if we don't have these enhanced programs because of staff for the summer, so some of the kids in the high school, I mean, at the junior high school are gonna fall behind.
I know, we're looking at that. It's a concern.
Okay.
So it sounds like staffing is a theme all the way around.
Yeah, I saw the city struggle with it with your fire and your police.
Well, and I was really just thinking about the schools right now, needing to pay teachers more, but also recruiting. Do you think you'll be able to fill the positions for the summer? To Flavia's point about helping kids recover.
We're in hopes to.
Yeah.
But I get a weekly report from my administrative team in regards to whether or not they've got the number they need yet. And I can tell you the junior high didn't have the number they needed yet.
Okay. So I guess at some
Claude over
point,
there.
Claude, one more time.
okay. Claude, go ahead.
Let me see if I understand your presentation on salaries and where the ask is for the school at this point. You've put in you're requesting assuming a 5% increase in salaries, and you're asking for $1 million from the school to cover that. Is that correct?
So are you requesting $1 million for the schools? I guess that's the question.
No,
And that was my
we're not requesting
question.
anything at this time. This is just
Okay.
a workshop. I've yet to talk to my board about this.
Okay, so what you've presented with us is roughly $775,000. but you're just pointing out that that won't be adequate to really move the needle on
Correct.
wages.
But that figure does include the 5% that we
Right.
have in there thus far. That's
Okay.
part of that 733.
Okay, yeah.
The reason that I ask, Eric, is that in the city's budget, we're still struggling at this point to get the city to where we're solid fiscally, and it's looking more and more like we may have to do some sort of tax increase this year to maintain fiscal stability. If the schools are going to need more money for the teachers, that's going to put extra pressure on us. So basically what I'm asking is if you're willing to say publicly that the school teachers could stand a raise, even if it might increase the tax rate for the city.
Okay.
I am staying away from that one.
In a nutshell, the request was, are you willing to go on record to say that, that raising teachers' wages would merit a tax increase for Waterville citizens?
Well, I wouldn't say that because I don't know what your tax base is and how much money you raise on a mill at this point. I knew what it used to be. With all the new valuation going on in the city, I don't. And I don't know where the board's going to go with the number that we need in order to bring the teacher negotiations to closure.
Can I ask a simple question?
Yeah.
When will you have your final ask number for us? We do this dance every year.
Usually you tell us when you want that final number and we make sure it gets to you by that
And there's
date.
the answer you're going to get.
And if we need to schedule special board meetings to do that, we will.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we are coming down to the last home stretch here. We've got a lot of work to do on our budget, and
And some of us aren't in for a tax increase.
right. I mean, I think the point that Councillor Frankie's trying to make is that we need to weigh the obviously we need to weigh the increase for wages to the teachers against the ability of our citizens to have a tax increase, and I think we all realize that that's a difficult calculus.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yes, and I raised the issue, Eric, not particularly to put you on the spot, but just to make sure that the discussion is had earlier in the process rather than at the last meeting where we approved the final budget and all of a sudden there's a big tax increase. So I just am trying to keep the conversation going in that regard, why the collective bargaining negotiations we had with the police department and the fire department, we with those unions, we ran into the same thing that you're running into with the teachers, that our wage rates were way below the area standards, and that's one of the things that is putting pressure on the budget this year, as we negotiated substantial raises for those employees, and in fact, even for the non-union employees, we've included raises. So we're trying to raise Waterville up to modern standards, and I appreciate that you're looking to at the schools in that same viewpoint. However, I got to caution everybody that that the pot of money is not there's a finite amount, and the main thing here is I think the people in Waterville, the citizens, need to know that if we do raise taxes, it's because we want to do the right thing for the people that work for us, whether they be firefighters or teachers, whoever. Thank you.
I have a question. Can
Go
you hear
ahead.
me? Okay, so I think my question is more for Steve. What is the contribution that the residents pay towards the school versus the surrounding areas? Are the residents here in Waterville paying more towards the school versus Vassarboro, for instance, or Madison?
We only have information on what the Waterville School Department share of the property tax levy is compared to the city. And previously, it's been, in the 45 to 50% range. This projected budget shows it as 47% of the tax levy.
And I believe that's actually a little lower than it has been in past years.
That's correct.
Right, yeah.
So what was it before that, before the 47%? You said it was higher?
Yeah, it was it would go up as far as 50, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, the last 3 years plus this year went 49, 50, 46, and 47.
So that is consistent with what the superintendent was saying, that the last 2 years, it kind of the ripple effect of it going down. Does that make sense? Maybe.
I'm not sure I understand.
Because the superintendent, he was saying that in the last 2 years, there hasn't been an increase, there hasn't been a change to the wages.
No, what I'm saying is that of the tax levy that the city commits, the share taken by the school department or dedicated to the school department has been decreasing, but you can look at that the other way around and say that the share dedicated to the city has been increasing. So the actual dollars going to the school department have been increasing, but the ratio of the tax levy, or the portion of the tax levy that they're consuming, has been decreasing by 1% a year, just over the last 2 years plus this year.
So, but I don't think those things are necessarily tied to wage increases, right?
No.
So that the number of dollars is going up that the city is giving the schools, but the percentage that goes to the schools versus the city went down this year. Right? So,
Yes. And you
but-
can attribute that to the city's cost rising at a slightly greater rate
right.
than the school's costs.
Okay.
By way of comparison, mid-90s, it was 33 to 36% went to the schools.
That is
Okay,
correct.
do we have any other questions for the school department? Okay, yes, go ahead, Amy.
So,
And if you just
Can you-
state your name, so.
Amy Murphy, Ward 2.
Who you are.
Our schools have seen a huge loss of teachers. We don't have enough subs. Special teachers are required to come in, so they're not teaching, let's say, art because they have to sub. We are definitely hurting in the school systems. There aren't enough teachers, and we're losing it to salaries. I live in the city as well. I don't want an increase, but I really think these salaries need to go up. We cannot compete with other schools surrounding us, and we're losing the teachers so rapidly. It's really greatly affecting our schools. Our schools, if you go to greatschools.com, is just dropping. You know, teachers are dealing with so much right now between, like Eric was saying, between the emotional, the social and emotional, and the academic. They need more, not less. So I understand that this is a tight money season. It's tight for everybody. But if we don't give our schools more money and more attention, I don't see them improving at all. And it worries me as a parent and a citizen. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd have to agree. The teachers are really the backbone of the schools, and losing teachers is not something we can afford. And I've also seen the ratings go down the last few years, so it's definitely a concern.
Because it's also not losing the teachers, it's losing the kids too, because they're not getting the education that they're supposed to be getting because the teachers are not there.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else before we close this portion of the evening? I guess I would just return to the question of when we might get a number from you. I know it's complex since you're in the middle of negotiations as well. But when is the next board meeting of the school board?
June 13th.
Yeah, you'll have to do that before
Wow.
that. We'll need it before that.
Okay, so I think that's, we really would need to have your number shortly after that. Thank you.
We'll make it happen.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, okay. Sure, I can do that.
Going solo tonight? You're doing a
We have
fantastic job.
non-operating cost and revenue.
Okay, so we're moving on to non-operating costs. That would be Steve.
Wait, I apologize. I'm sorry. Can I make, Eric, before you go, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about something. So June 13th is your next board meeting, right? And you're going to go to the board to say, okay, where do we want to land with, or are you coming back with a number of where you want to land or where you need to land?
We're going to come back with a number that the board can support in regards to what we do with teacher contracts.
Because, like,
That's the only thing out there hanging. Everything else is solid.
no, right, but like from our perspective, right? Because now you're putting us at the 13th. We'll get this number on the 14th. Our next city council meeting will be the 24th. So we have a week to kind of digest this, so that we can kind of hopefully, if with a special meeting, we can get this thing done by the end of June, so that we don't have to go back to your board to say, well, what about this? Can we start with the high, and then wherever we, like if we can say, well, we can't support this, but we can support, can we have multiple options? You know what I mean? Like, so you're going to go to your board and say, okay, well, they want this. Well, that's great. We want to do a lot of things too, but we can't support that from the city side. So plan B, C, and D are these particular options. And at that point, we can land on one, say, hey, we couldn't give you A, but we gave you C, which was this %, and then you guys can just do whatever you want. So that way, just in an essence of time and having to go back to your board and say, well, this is what they do. What do you want to do about that? And what can we, maybe you can change things on your end if you still want to get to A, which would be fine. But if the more options that we have to make a decision versus one number, I think would probably be helpful.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like I said, we ran 5 simulations.
Right.
One of them was just, let's just see what the highest number would be.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And then
Give us all 5.
I'm thinking where the lowest is, so somewhere in between, we
Yeah.
gotta come up with that number. And we'll let you know some other options.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay. Moving on to non-operating costs.
Non-operating costs. We have 4 categories here with the non-operating costs. The first is debt service. You can see that our projected debt service cost is just a little over $2.1 million. We have a debt service ceiling by policy of 2.5 million. So we're slightly under that, but this, that room allows us to issue another bond in probably 3 years, 2 to 3 years. Outside agencies, there's $100,000 in there again this year, as there was, again next year, as there is this year. Calling out KV Cap, Alphond Youth Center, Waterville Creates, and miscellaneous community services, as we did in the past, in the current budget rather. There's $50,000 set aside there for the miscellaneous community services, which is something that the ARPA committee is managing from an application process. Then with Tif Revenue Deductions, these are the amounts of money that we need to set aside from the general tax levy in order to account for the TIF revenue that we receive. The way it works is that $1.5 million in anticipated TIF revenue is set aside as an expense and put off into a separate fund, which we call the TIF fund. And then later on, later on in this budget, we take that money back and apply it to the revenue side of the budget. And then finally, the Kennebec County tax is listed here at just a little over $900,000, which turns out to be a 9.3% increase that was originally projected by the county administrator at between 2 and 3%. So the county did something we didn't expect. Total non-operating costs as a result are $4.7 million. And in summary and in some detail, those costs transfer to the previous page, which is the cost projection. That includes, in addition to the non-operating costs, the city's operating costs, the school department operating costs, and capital expenses. A point to note here is that because of the difficulty we're having balancing this budget, we've eliminated capital expenses in 2022. None of these non-operating costs are extraordinary increases. In many cases, with respect to the debt service, they're a reduction from the current year. And the only one that stands out as a significant increase which also accounts for a substantial amount of money, is the increase in the county tax.
Questions?
Moving on.
Is that it for non-operating?
That's it for non-operating, yes. So if we move on to the revenue projection,
Sure.
there are two components to this. We have non-operating revenues that are more numerous than the non-operating costs. And our non-operating revenues include the property tax, which we show here as a net of the total property tax with the TIF revenue taken out of it. We have penalties and interests of $104,000. We also have excise taxes there that remain flat. the intergovernmental revenue that we have has gone up a little over, actually about $950,000. Rental revenue and other revenue remain flat, and the use of other funds, shown at $1.85 million, is $1.1 million greater than last year. That $1.85 million is the use of fund balance. Then the use of TIF funds is shown here in this budget at $1.7 million. That's because we're using the entire amount from the current year, from this budget year rather, at $1.5 million, and adding $200,000 from the TIF fund balance to total of $1.7 million. Property tax revenues are shown below, where we have a total of $19.248 million. That's the gross property tax revenue. The net amount is $17.7 million, which is comprised of real estate taxes at $17.7, personal property at $1.5, and then the $1.5 million of TIF revenue is taken out of that, so that we end up with a net property tax to work with of $17.7 million. Penalties and interest remain the same. We went over this up above. This is all the detail that backs up the summary at the very top. When you get down to the end of that sheet, you'll see that the use of fund balance at $1.685 million is listed there, and the use of ARPA funds for $165,000 is also listed. And I believe that has been pointed out to you previously, that that would pay for the 2 new positions in the police department, the mental health worker and the police lieutenant. That is a proposal, obviously subject to your approval. When you look at the TIF revenue down under that, what we're doing there is explaining which TIFs contribute to that total of $1.7 million. And you can see that the largest contributor at this point is the city center TIF at $372,000, followed closely by the gas pipeline at $351,000, and then the downtown TIF at $300,000. The Hathaway TIF is also there at $233,000. But in that case, I think 65% of that revenue goes to a CEA. So that money goes back to the Hathaway organization. So that's the non-operating side of the revenues, but when you look at the revenue projection summary, it shows that the city departmental revenues total $2.8 million. The taxes and other revenues total $20 million. And the other funding sources total $9.5 million. The school revenues are $18.8 million. And down below, you'll see the detail of where the city operating revenues come from. Our most productive department in that respect is the Fire, Rescue, and Emergency Medical Department at revenues of $583,000 projected, which is up $123,000 from the current year. And we have airport revenue that's up $75,000 from the current year, projecting it to be almost $500,000 next year. And this year it was, these are the budget numbers that you see here for FY22. We've exceeded that budget number on revenue at the airport by a substantial amount. I think it's almost 30%. Then when we get down into the taxes and other revenues, property tax revenue, we show an increase of 2.6%, which is just under $450,000. And that's with the mill rate staying exactly the same as it is right now. Then under other funding sources, we're going back through the use of fund balance and the TIF funds, and it's information that came from the previous page. Our intergovernmental revenues are up $950,000, but I mentioned that already, at $6 million, and school revenues are up just under $1 million at $18.8 million. So in total, we have $51.4 million in projected revenue, and where to go? And I have to finish that sentence.
We're on the edge of our
Cliffhanger.
seats. No pressure.
So we have projected revenues of $51.3 million, I think it is, and projected cost of 52.4. When we adjust the revenues for the TIF payouts, we have a total of $49,580,000, which, when you apply the use of fund balance at $1.68 million and the use of the ARPA funds at $165,000, leaves us with a shortfall of $975,000, which is roughly 1.2 mils. Do you have questions?
Go ahead, Rick.
I'm a little stuck on a certain building down at the end of Main Street on the left-hand side as you're heading towards the new circle.
Oh, the hotel?
The hotel.
Yes.
Who controls taxability on that structure? Dorm versus regular commercial building? Because we made decisions on that TIF money being available, and them being claiming it as a dorm has affected the decisions that we as a council made with the assumptions that those monies were coming inbound, and now they're not, which drastically affects that TIF, if I'm not mistaken.
It does. It does. Let me start at the beginning. The administration also anticipated that revenue. We anticipated it to be reaching about $1.3 million next year, and it's not going to do that. The use of the building is what controls its taxable value.
And that is left to the proprietor, the person in charge, the entity that's in charge?
Well, you can build any building, and depending on how you use it, it gets taxed based on that use. So if you build an office building and let's say you're a religious organization, tax exempt, right? You build a building, you rent it out, you pay taxes based on the income that you get from renting it out because it's gone to a commercial use. You use it as a religious facility for whatever religious purposes you have, it's not taxable. The same is the case with the dorm, not the dorm, the hotel.
Mhm.
It,
Billed to us as a commercial property and is being sold as a tax-free entity.
right,
Got it. That's the point that I'm making, is that
I
that
understand.
was sold to the city of Waterville as a taxable TIF district, okay? And is being used as a tax-free dorm. That's not fair to the citizens of Waterville, the taxpayers. And that's why I'm a little stuck on that.
well, it's also why Colby is building 4 new dormitories on campus right now, so that they can extract their students from the hotel, and it goes back into the use that it was intended to be.
The original reason after they opened the doors was COVID. And now it's being used as a dorm. It's not being used as an emergency shelter for COVID. It's being used as a dorm. If I'm not mistaken, the way I read all this, when they opened those doors, COVID was hitting. And they said, okay, we've got to expand these kids out past the 6-foot rule, which forced kids off campus and into that. And we all were, yeah, do what you got to do.
I think that's true, but at the same time, colleges, just like schools, work on a different calendar than we do. And their school year goes from September through May, or into May. And if they move their students into the hotel in September, I don't know, well, apparently they're not willing to move them out in January.
Have they given any?
Can I just jump in here and say, I mean, we can speculate about their reasons for using their property the way they are, but it is their right.
It is their right. You're
yeah.
right. You're absolutely right. And I'm not taking away from that. I'm asking why. And my next question is, are they going to commit to commercial, or are they going to commit to dorms for the 22-23 season, so that we can either bank on that or not bank on that?
There are 2 parts to this answer. One is that I can ask them. The second part is that our tax values are set on April 1st every year. So the use to which that building was put on April 1st determines what its taxable value is for the tax year ahead of that date. So for this coming budget, we're locked in with that being used as a dormitory. So we won't see that increase that we anticipated from it being converted, or not converted, but going back to its original use until the FY24 budget.
Right.
But I will
Yeah.
ask the question.
I mean, there are other things, of course, in the budget that are unexpected and that we can't control. But I think it's an important discussion to have in any future TIF
It would seem that
allocations.
it would seem that the school year was over end of May. So if you don't need the dorm space the end of May till September, there should be a hotel revenue sitting there. That would, if they don't have the students here, because everybody's gone home for the summer, what is it?
As Steve pointed out, April
That's-
1st is the date that,
But that reeks of,
of what? Yeah.
I will tell you that, Claude.
I'm gonna go to Claude now.
Well, I think the council chair put her finger on it. It's private property, and the property owners are entitled to do whatever they want with their private property within the law. The question I have for you, Steve, is we've got a substantial payment from the solar farm up at the airport, and but I have not been able to find that anywhere in the revenue side of your spreadsheet. Have I missed something, or is that something we've just overlooked?
It's not shown The fee, by resolution vote by the council, went into a separate account as a capital account for the airport. It would be seen as a revenue in this budget if it were going to be used to cover any of the costs of the airport that were capital costs. There are no capital costs for the airport in this budget, and that $250,000 remains in that account.
So that's one of the things that we could look at in terms of finding revenue. Am I correct? It doesn't have to be in the capital account.
Claude is asking if that's something we can look at as revenue.
You can, but you've already voted to set it aside for airport capital use. You can. We'd have to look at the gymnastics of using that money.
My point being that we don't have a capital use at the airport right now, but we are looking at $1 million shortfall in the current budget. I'm just suggesting that we start looking for places where there might be pots of money sitting around and take use of them. You've already accounted all of the money from the Tif revenue that's been collected. So we're not setting any of that aside, even though there are certainly projects that would be susceptible to Tif expenditures coming down the pike.
To coin a phrase, that would be robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and that's one-time money. And what I mean by that is that if you apply it to operating expenses, you can't apply it twice because it doesn't regenerate. We'll get another $250,000 payment when the solar farm goes operational, but that's going to be months from now, if not in the next budget year. I'm not sure when that's going to happen.
So, under what circumstances would that money be used for capital? At the airport?
At the airport to maintain the terminal building, to build other facilities, to build hangars, as an example.
Mm-hmm. But would that be planned for in a capital
yes.
improvement plan?
We'd show that in a capital plan that would show the funding source as that capital reserve account for the airport, as opposed to any other revenues that we have.
So there are no plans to do that this year, but there will be another payment going into that fund next year.
Yes.
So doesn't that mean that we have those funds available if we chose to move them into the general fund?
If you choose to do that, you can. You're the legislative body. You can make that decision. It's not a restricted reserve that you put it into. So you have the license to do that.
Well, given that we have $1 million shortfall and we're anticipating another request from the board, from the school board, I think we have to look at every possible idea to try to get a balanced budget here. So I'd certainly be willing to look at that. Rick?
Steve, was the 250 to be held? Yeah, that's on. Was the 250 to be held to the confines of the airport or the airport road, meaning the unused parcels of land down at the end of the road where we need to expand out?
The set aside was specifically for the airport.
10-4, thank you.
And that, to be clear, that was for improvements to the, what do they call that building? The
terminal?
Yeah. And those aren't happening, right? And then, or is that still happening? That was part of the bond, right? Like, do we give them money for, I forget what they gave, do we give them any money in this bond or no?
Yes, I think there's $100,000 in there for the terminal building.
But this money is earmarked for the creation of hangars.
That was
Which
one
are-
of the purposes.
Which are already in request and demand and would be
Yes.
a source of revenue for the city.
Yes.
So if we did decide as a legislative body to pull that money out because they don't have the full amount of money to do that, and they have this amount of money that we've earmarked for them, then when they get the rest of the money, they would be in negative and an opportunity to create its revenue.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Claude.
I think this simply underlines the problem of doing these special set-aside accounts at a time when we've already put ourselves behind the 8 ball with the money that we've segregated for the TIF, from the various TIF districts. These special funds, they just kind of float out there. Nobody knows where they are, what they're doing. They don't get accounted. You never see them in the budget. And I just think that it's time to put a stop to this kind of finagling with the budget.
Go ahead, Steve.
While I take exception to the term finagling, this is a very common practice of municipalities. The money that's set aside in these accounts those accounts are effectively savings accounts. And we went through that experience with the purchase of an ambulance just recently. And just as in your household budget, you can use your savings accounts for current costs if you choose. But we all think twice and sometimes 3 times before we do that, because what we're saving for is going to have to be paid for in another way, if at all. So
Well, let me just.
What I can do.
Steve, we've got to pay for it one way or the other. We've taken $250,000 off the table, and instead we're going to ask the taxpayers to come up with that money. I just think it's the wrong way to go.
It's all a matter of how you look at it.
I was going to say, we haven't asked the taxpayers to pick up anything yet. We're trying to figure out where we can get all this funding source. And, I'm still not unsold from taking it out of the general fund if revenues for the 23-24 season look like they're going to be $1.2 million and can cover expected costs increases for that same season. And I know it seems like it's doom and gloom, but just a week ago, we were all like, yeah, you know what? We can get there. It's going to take some work. And maybe we're not far off on this 250. Maybe we take 125 out of it. We just don't drain the account. Because we are, just like Councilor Morse said, we put that money away. We earmark it so that we can make revenue down the road off of that money. Make money with your money. Don't drain it out just because we're in panic mode.
I
think we can, if we let Finance Committee get in a quiet room and start hammering out the ideas. The rest of us could beat this around to death tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the next step we need to take. But I'd like to see projected revenue for the next at least year, TIF funds and tax levy. And also, what is the capital plan for the airport? What's the need going to be next year? Is it going to be 500,000? That those pieces of information are important for us to have in making these decisions.
They are, and one of the things I can also provide to you is an accounting of all of these special accounts, these reserve accounts that we have, and I can show you what the balances are in those.
I think we absolutely need to see those, yes.
Yeah, I'm the new guy. I was wondering how many of them are out there. I was saying I'm the new guy, and I was wondering how many of them are out there. I know of 2.
I'm still a new guy in that respect too, because I don't know how many there are.
I think that's the problem. No one here knows.
How many might be out there that they're not, let's call it the envelope for lack of a better. We've all got the envelopes that we save for something. Well, we've used this envelope, and there's a little bit left. But the life of purpose for these envelopes is gone.
Good analogy.
Well, I just had a, is my mic on? Is this thing on?
Yeah, but you
can't
gotta
tell.
get close.
Now? Is it on now? Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. I can see it's on. Okay. I don't know. I just got really curious about these numbers, especially Vassaboro. So I looked it up, and in 2019, they invested $7.97 million into the school department. So that's why they are where they are with this number. So right now, I'm looking at, like, wow, our school department is asking for 2, and they don't even want to ask for that.
Remember that Vassalboro doesn't have 9 through 12, though, if I remember right. If I'm correct in
No, they
stating.
have a high school.
Vassalboro has a high school? No, they send to, send to us in Winslow.
But it's still, they don't
Oakland.
have, but even look at that, it's even more of a thing,
And-
because they
and
don't have a high
and
school.
I'm not negating, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Remember, there's no 9 through 12 in Vassalboro.
Yeah, so that's like that,
They don't
that's
have a fire
I mean, for a
department, they don't have a
surrounding
police
area, that's a
department, they
big
don't have-
number. I just wanted
Claude?
to toss that out
Yeah,
there.
yeah, thank you. That is an important piece of information and eye-opening. I have something to say about that, but I'll let Claude go ahead.
Well, just while we're thinking about pots of money that may be lurking out there, Steve, I would like to see where we stand with all of the bonds that we've issued over the past several years, and where whether they were all issued for a specific purpose, and for instance, when they bonded to buy the tower truck for the fire department, like they ended up with $100,000 or so at the after they bought the truck, so that had to be used for some other similar purpose, which is what they bought the used ambulances. So my question is, are there any other bond funds out there that, have we spent all of the money for all of the bonds, or is there still money lingering out there that needs to be accounted for? So if you could do that while you're getting everything else together, I know you haven't got anything else to do but answer Councilor Frankie's questions, but thank you.
Did you get that, Steve?
I thought I had.
Okay. I think there was a joke at the end there.
That's what I thought, yeah.
So,
We'll figure that out and show you the numbers. Right now, our new finance director is working on reconciling all the bonds, finding that there are some discrepancies from what we thought was the case, and she's working on that diligently right now because she knows we need to know.
okay, great,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to point out regarding revenue and projections in the future that our largest single source of revenue is property taxes.
Yep.
And the way that that's going to grow, aside from revaluation, is if people move to Waterville and purchase homes. And if they have children, they're going to look at the schools and they're going to decide whether they want their children to be in the Waterville school system. And so I want us to think about investment in the schools in the same way that we might invest in the airport hangar. And of course, not to mention the fact that these are human beings, and this is one of our primary responsibilities to provide an education for children in our community.
And when we did the retreat, it came up as our top priority. So this is the time to really act on it.
Anything else?
No.
All right. Meeting adjourned.
Drop the gavel.
All right.
There's no adjournment.